Hey there, this is going to be the first in a series of videos I'll be doing, talking in depth about my favorite novels of all time, both their literary background and place in the larger canon or an encyclopedia of English literature, as well as just my personal history at the books. The first book I'd like to talk about is my favorite novel of all time, or definitely in the top 3, top 4, Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. For this video, I'll be using and referencing both the book itself, as you can see, pretty thin, and then the Joseph Frank biography of Dostoevsky, which is not so thin. I know it's intimidating, but I do recommend reading this if you're a fan of the novels. They've helped me, and it's helped me understand the books and the man and the political and economic and social context in which he was writing, in which Notes from Underground, as well as his other novels like Crime and Punishment, deal with directly. So to understand the context in which Notes from Underground was written, it's important to talk a little bit about the intellectual currents which were operating in Russia at the time of the writing of the book. Notes from Underground was written by Dostoevsky in 1864. If you're familiar with his life, this was after he had been imprisoned in Siberia for several years for radical political activity, but it was before the writing of his great novels, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. So he was not a particularly famous figure at the time, but he had gone through the transformation of his religious beliefs, which happened during his time in Siberia, and which directly influenced Notes from Underground and really all the work he did post-Siberia. So if you read the pre-Siberia stuff, it's quite markedly different, but that is material that is better covered in the Joseph Frank biography, so I won't go into too much detail. So Notes from Underground is a direct challenge to the thoughts, processes, which were very in vogue with the radical intelligentsia at the time in Russia, and this is the early 1860s. At the time, the radical thinkers in Russia were very enamored with a sort of rationalist way of understanding socialism, by which I mean it was a socialism based on the idea that the world's problems can be solved solely through the natural sciences, that a sort of brutal utilitarianism is the way towards social progress, in which people only follow what is logically good for them and ignore things like self-sacrifice or love for others or charity, because if everyone follows their selfish impulses, eventually things will work out, because according to these theories, the selfish impulses of man ultimately lead to social progress. Now, Dostoevsky was hard against this. This man was devoutly religious, and he was just coming out of a time in which he had been very much into a sort of Christian-influenced socialism, and now his views were changing, and the idea that people should embrace an egoistic, selfish ideology just disgusted him. And so Notes from Underground, much like a lot of his later works, is taking this idea of selfish, egoist self-fulfillment to its literal, most extreme conclusion. The underground man, the main character of the story, he doesn't have a name, is a narrator who has totally committed himself to the path of an intelligent man, as he refers to it, meaning he's totally committed to living his life solely through logic, casting away religion and family ties, everything that's not based on pure, rational self-interest. However, not only does this make him a totally egoistic, selfish, awful person to be around, he also can't help but rebel against it. He can't help but do things which are not strictly rational, but which exercise his own desire to have essentially freedom of conscience, freedom of control, the ability to make choices that are not just an animal reacting to stimuli. And this, in the novel, can be something kind of good, like deciding to strike up a friendship with a coworker, even though he's spent years working alongside this person and doesn't really like him, but he just has this need for companionship. Or it can be something really destructive, like at the end of the book, there's an extended passage in which he befriends and kind of manipulates this prostitute that he knows, and he's really pulling at her heartstrings and making her feel guilty for what she does, and simultaneously making her feel loved, but then making her feel hated. And it's all irrational to him. He doesn't understand why he's doing it. He doesn't really feel these things, but it's just toying with her to assert the fact that he can make decisions that are not purely based on some sort of utilitarian logic. The only true good person of the story, because the Underground Man is clearly a warped and terrible creature because of this ideology of utilitarian rationalism, which not only is he not able to actually fulfill, but just makes him an asshole, basically, a terrible person who nobody would want to emulate. But his counterpoint, his compatriots, his college friends, who are all this kind of dumb, pro-government, just kind of mindlessly pursuing their career people, they're not very admirable either, because they're pursuing a sort of logical life themselves, but it's more out of lack of thinking or lack of intelligence, as opposed to the Underground Man's sort of obsessive overthinking, which has led him to behave in this way. The only pure sort of good character of the novel is the prostitute Liza, who represents a sort of Christian values, purely kind of emotional, hearted way of thinking, which Dostoevsky personally thought was so important and which could ultimately save humanity. You know, she, at the end of the book, the Underground Man is trying to offer her money, trying to offer her love, just to kind of assert his dominance over her, and she rejects him because, as the book kind of makes clear, she understands and embraces ideas about the afterlife and ideas about kindness and having mutual respect for others, which are not purely utilitarian, but which in fact are the opposite. They do nothing to serve her, except that they nourish a sort of emotional and spiritual core within her. And Liza, like a lot of characters in Dostoevsky's work, most famously in The Idiot, the main character, Prince Mishkin, represents a sort of miniature moment of Christ-like behavior on earth. And for him, this was not only the way forward to make society better, but was a uniquely Russian character type, because of course Dostoevsky in many ways is a Russian nationalist. That is the tenor of his work, is a sort of reactionary Orthodox Christianity and Russian nationalism. So talking a bit about my personal experience with Notes from Underground, I first read the book in sophomore year of college, and it really just hit me like a bombshell. I had never read anything by Dostoevsky before that, but the character of the Underground Man and his struggles with this sort of revolting, purely utilitarian, rational way of looking at the world, and the ways in which that can alienate you from others and make you feel unconnected to your own humanity and your own emotional needs, resonated a lot for me, especially as someone who really does appreciate the kind of atheistic, rational currents in a lot of leftist and progressive thought, and feels that way about the world in many ways. I do think Notes from Underground makes a good point. Obviously, it was written from the perspective of a reactionary Christian, but it is a fair critique, especially considering Dostoevsky was a progressive radical at one point in his life, that there is something missing in a lot of leftist theories. There's a lack of concern for morality and for a clear sort of system of understanding what it means to be ethical, and an understanding of the afterlife, and kind of grappling with the serious questions. You know, there's a leftist YouTuber named Natalie Wynn who I appreciate her videos a lot. I think she's really intelligent, and she has a great quote talking about Jordan Peterson and why he's so popular, and Jordan Peterson, a huge fan of Dostoevsky. And she says the conservatives talk about the afterlife a lot. They talk about what does it mean to be a good person? What happens when we die? These big, complicated, soul-searching questions. And leftists kind of brush those things aside, and we don't tend to talk about them. And I think it is to the detriment of leftist thought, just as Natalie Wynn says in the video that I'm referencing. So while I don't agree with Dostoevsky's personal political views. Obviously, I did not grow up in 1800s Tsarist Russia, so it's kind of irrelevant what my opinions about that society are. And I'm not an Orthodox Christian. I'm not really any kind of Christian at all. I do think that having read Dostoevsky, having read the Joseph Frank biography, and appreciating his religious views more, and having recently started reading some Kierkegaard and some other Christian philosophers, I do think that the left, in the broadest sense, could benefit from reading books like Notes from Underground and understanding that there is a religious component to life that needs to be addressed if you're trying to create social change, which can really change the world, especially given that in the context of 2021, the agents of any revolutionary or socialist change in the world will come from the global south, and they will be poor people, and people have religious backgrounds and religious views which do not always align with the sort of snarky, anti-religious, communist, anarchist, whatever kind of views, which a lot of the leftist types I've grown up with and known and was influenced by, that way of seeing the world doesn't always click with other people. And so I think it's very important for anyone who wants to change the world or merely to understand the world to be able to grapple with the big questions which have been highly influential in the lives of all the great thinkers. And so I think Dostoevsky, as a sort of bridge between the radical and reactionary thought of his time, he really occupies both camps in a way. I think he is a powerful force for understanding these questions. And I think Notes from Underground is a great way to start if you want to try and understand the role of or lack of role of religious thought in leftist understanding of the world. So yeah, let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what you think of the book. And if you have any suggestions for future stuff I should be working on or things I should be reading, please comment below. Thank you for watching.